Here we go. It's time to put all of our cards down on the table. We've got two machines with the same processor, the same GPU, basically the same internals, but on the outside, they are vastly different. Even though they're different, but even though some of us might want to use them for similar purposes. The M1 iPad Pro and the M1 MacBook Air. Which one comes out on top if you can only have one laptop-style computer? Let's find out. What's up, everyone? I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. This is going to be a tough one for me because I really like both of these machines. And honestly, they do serve different niches, and they're not really made to compete with each other. However, us being consumers doing consumer-type stuff, we will try to do much more than the designers ever intended with our gear. So today, I'm going to give you my opinion on which you should buy between these two if you can only have one. If you can have two computers, that's a different conversation. That's not the point of this video. First off, if this is your first time seeing either of these devices, let's actually see what we can get for these computers at their base model. And what is probably more important for the rest of the video, let's see how much it would cost to bring them up to parity with each other. The M1 MacBook Air is easily my favorite laptop ever made, and you can get the base model for $999, or even less refurbished. That base model comes with an 8-core M1 CPU, a 7-core GPU, 256 gigabytes of storage, and 8 gigabytes of unified memory. For the rest of this video, we will just call this RAM from now on to not cause too much confusion between the two devices. For the M1 iPad Pro, today we'll be using the 12.9-inch version as I think it's the more laptop-y one of the two options. So this comes standard for $1099. And yes, someday in the future, these will probably also be less on the refurbished site. But if you are watching this video on its release, it's not on there yet. I mean, heck, they haven't even shipped out all the original orders yet. So it's a little, look there, iPad. It's a little quick to be talking about you being refurbished when you're literally brand new. This iPad Pro comes with the same 8-core M1 processor. This base model is more like the MacBook Pro 13 in that it comes with the 8-core integrated GPU standard. This has 128 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So there you go. Just for the tablet itself, with half the storage and one more GPU core, the iPad will cost you about $100 more. That's not all though. Now we've got to get these two to the same level. So the way we'll do that is we'll spec that iPad up just a teensy bit more to get 256 gigabytes of storage. So now we're at $1199, and we're going to need a keyboard to make it more laptop-y, right? And while it's expensive, we are going to add the Apple Magic Keyboard as well. Despite its high cost, I do think it's the closest you will ever get to the excellence that is the MacBook Air's typing experience. So this iPad right now brings us to a grand total of $1,548 before tax. Yikes. So almost twice as much as what we can get the MacBook Air for. It's not a good look, iPad. Yes, the MacBook Air will be missing a GPU core, but that's literally not affecting the performance in any real way. But for information's sake, if we were to get the version with the 8-core GPU, the MacBook Air would bump up to $1,249 or $1,059 refurbished. Dang, I love that refurbished website. Is that one core worth $300 additional? No, absolutely not. And this is my first point. If you want the same sort of work experience physically, I'm not talking about software, we'll get to that in a second. I'm talking about an experience that strictly comes down to carrying around a machine, bringing it out, setting it on a table, and opening up to type on. Just to do that, the iPad Pro at the same storage levels cost almost twice as much. But that's not the whole story. You do give up a few extra things, even if you are paying more. Let's talk physical ports on the two devices. One of the cool things about this generation of M1 iPads is they have upgraded this port to an actual Thunderbolt 3/USB-C 4 port, much like the MacBook Air. Except the MacBook Air has two ports compared to the single port on the iPad. But even if you do, you're like, hey, okay, Gary, I'm going to buy the iPad, I'm going to buy the keyboard. Now I have two ports. But you don't get double Thunderbolt port functionality. The port on the keyboard is strictly for charge. It's incredible, don't get me wrong. But if you need more than just charging when your main port is occupied, or if you don't want some silly dongle hanging off the side of your machine with a bunch of junk coming out of it, well, tough, because this is the only dongle port on the iPad. Dongle. Wow, that did not make much sense either typing it or reading it back. But wait again, there is even more before we move on from the single port versus double ports on the MacBooks. Let's say again, you can only have one computer and you want that computer to do dual duty as a travel computer but also the brain of your working from home setup. Thankfully, both computers have Thunderbolt 3 ports, which actually means that's a feasible use case for both. And I do give credit where it is due. to both of these machines. Each has a killer Bluetooth functionality, so if you wanted to set them up into a system, it's very easy to get both working with all sorts of mice, keyboards, and other accessories. However, my main issue using the iPad Pro in this sort of configuration, and that's not just specifically the M1 iPad Pro, all of the iPads do this, but it hurts even more here because the M1 iPad Pro has that Thunderbolt port. When you plug this into a display, you'll not be able to use the full width of that display. You will absolutely get a crop on both sides of the image, and they will stay there no matter what you do. There are a few exceptions, and they mainly have to do with apps sending out a normal widescreen image from their app. It's not that the app itself is widescreen, it's that it is generally showing you a preview of an already existing file, normally video files or photos, that is being displayed onto an external monitor. There is no such limitation on the MacBook Air. You plug it in and you'll get a display. Plus, you'll have lots of customization options for how that external display is going to be handled. You can change color profiles, whether to mirror the existing MacBook desktop or even extend the display and have dual monitor functionality. I don't say this phrase very often. I cannot remember the last time I actually said this in a video because it's so often an inaccurate description. But here, the MacBook Air is objectively better than the iPad if you want to use external displays. This is ridiculous. You'll hear me complain about this every single video where we talk about the iPad. This is the biggest weakness of the iPad in all shapes and forms. Oh, and as telework and the like have become such a big part of, well, everything, I think it's fair to mention that the iPad Pro has the far superior camera. Not only does this camera sort of zoom and follow you around, but this is 1080p compared to the 720p camera on the MacBook Air. Yes, both are totally fine for a Teams meeting or a school day or other sorts of telework projects, but it's 2021. 1080p should just be the standard, especially on computers that are as expensive as these both can be. And the last part of physical design that I want to touch on are the two displays. Both have Retina panels, but that's like saying a Tesla and a 1999 Ford Taurus are cars. Yes, it's technically true, but one will clearly go faster than the other. The display on the MacBook Air is totally functional, if uninspired. This is a 2560 by 1600 Retina panel that can go up to 400 nits of brightness, and as a standard laptop goes, yeah, it's okay. The 12.9-inch iPad Pro has a mini LED display that is legitimately one of the best displays I've ever seen in my life. This has a 2732 by 2048 Liquid Retina XDR panel that can traditionally go up to 600 nits of brightness, but if you are in HDR mode for watching movies or other high dynamic range content, this can go up to 1600 nits of max brightness. There really isn't anything else to say. This is not only the nicest touchscreen that I've ever seen, it's just the nicest screen I've ever seen. I'm telling you, even if you don't buy this, even if you never buy an iPad Pro, you should definitely go to Best Buy or an Apple store or some other place that has these in stock and just check out the display. You will not be disappointed. Okay, so now I think it's time to talk about the power we could expect from each of these computers. And yes, I do consider both of these to be computers. Trying to argue semantics that the iPad is some other kind of device that doesn't compute things because it has a touchscreen instead of a, well, not touchscreen and it's just a tablet by itself, that's childish. They're both computers. Here's a quick note. I don't want to get bogged down too far into the macOS versus iPadOS performance in this video. Yes, the two operating systems are quite different and both excel in different ways. iPadOS is hyper specialized around its specific apps, and because of that, it can achieve a serious amount of power without needing what are considered normal specs. Look at the 2018 iPad Pro. That thing could fly past even pro-level MacBooks for power in its day. It had 4 gigabytes of RAM and a far less powerful processor. macOS, on the other hand, is a more traditional operating system. Kind of. In the new M1s, the line is blurred a little bit. This will still work like macOS normally works, but one of the ancillary benefits of this also being on an ARM-based platform like the iPad is most iPad and iPhone apps can be run via the new M1 Macs. But it doesn't work the other way around, so macOS applications, at least as of today, who knows what the future will bring, but macOS applications cannot be run on the iPad. So when we get right down to it, both of these computers will have excellent power in whatever ways you could want. If you are using this for productivity applications, you definitely won't notice a difference. Both will be incredibly fast, loading applications and the like. If you're doing power tasks like, say, video editing or gaming, you'll see very comparable performance across the board. Even though my MacBook Air has one less GPU core, it will handle all of the same video codecs and will also render out that 4K in basically the same amount of time. That's an absolute win for both of these devices, by the way. And that's what I want to get across is each is great in its own way. This video is going to require something of you too, right? Like if you were looking for one of these, you have to know what operating system you can work off of because they both work so well. Computers aren't always about raw numbers or how cool their display technology is or how much they drive me crazy because they do weird crops when you plug them into an external display because it's 2020 and like, come on, man. And by man, I mean iPad. We already hit peak work power years ago. So what I care most about and what I've found to be the most important useful feature is actually battery life. Makes sense, right? I mean, if the computer doesn't work, it's not really all that useful, now is it? Here is the reverse the display conversation we had earlier. A year ago, I had this as a pass-fail kind of a gate. Does the device work for an 8-hour workday? Check. Okay, good, you've passed. But the M1 Macs and the MacBook Air specifically have changed this philosophy of mine because they last much longer than a traditional 8 or up to 14, I guess depending on your industry. Depends on the day, right? Some days I have 8, some days I have 14. Though whatever kind of workday you have, this will handle it. This will last for roughly 18 hours of use. That's incredible. And essentially, what that really means, because who works for 18 hours? What that really means is you don't have to worry about power because it will always have power so long as you make a reasonable attempt to plug it in every other day or so. The iPad Pro, well, like I said, it will pass the 8-hour gate, and it will actually go to about 10 if you only have the Wi-Fi model, and that's like, okay. It meets the 15 pieces of flare standard, but it doesn't try to go that little extra. And that's what we need here at Tchotchkes. This is going to sound like a nitpick, but it really isn't, especially if you are looking for a device that will make you money. The almost double extra battery life of the MacBook Air is the killer feature that makes it stand up so well to basically every other laptop on the market. I cannot find anything else that can beat the MacBook Air at any price, well, besides the MacBook Pro 13. And I've spent, look at all my videos in 2021, I've spent probably close to $10,000 looking. That's how impressive it is that this has the battery life that it does. But not only that, at the price that it does. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Which of these computers comes out on top and which do I recommend? Well, I'm pretty sure from the rest of the video you saw this. This should be obvious. But if you need a computer to do traditional computer things, get the MacBook Air. It's not even close. There used to be an argument, and I made it quite a few times, that living within the imitations of an iPad was fine because you got all of that power in such a small package. Well, you don't have to give up anything anymore. You can have crazy desktop levels of power from a tiny little Ultrabook that weighs almost nothing, can be purchased for way less than the competition, and just works better than everything else. However, if you want a content consumption device, easily go with the 12.9-inch M1 iPad Pro. It's got the power to run anything you could ever need, has one of the best displays ever made, is just a gorgeous device, and if you are looking for a second computer, I think it's better to have a Mac Mini or a MacBook and an iPad than a Mac Mini and another Mac, because you get more functionality of a Mac plus iPad than a Mac plus Mac. Obviously, these are not one-for-one devices, but I do think there are enough of us looking to use these similarly, and if you are, this video was directly made for you. Welcome. And if you like this video and you want to see a little more coverage on the brand new M1 iPad Pro, here's a link to my entire playlist of all of the cool stuff that we've talked about so far about this brand new iPad. And you can find it by clicking right here. Click, 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 click. Thanks for watching.